How many languages do you speak? I speak 3, and I'm not one of those YouTubers who's going to just make up 12 languages that I speak simply because I can get by in asking for a Coke in a cafe, and that's the limit of my language. Yes, I know a bit of Dutch, and I did try learning Dutch for a while, and I can understand bits of Spanish when people speak it, but that doesn't mean that I can speak it. And by the end of my life, I hope to learn German and Hebrew, and I've recently taken up a bit of Romanian. For my Romanian viewers, I know there are quite a few of you. But I'm Benjamin, and this video is, I want to show you in a short video how languages, the layers that you build, because each language is a layer to your character. It changes you and changes how you interact with the world and what you perceive of it. So here are 9 people throughout history who, rather than spoke a lot of different languages, just people that you might not have expected spoke several languages. And at the end, I'll give you a bonus person who, though we don't know exactly what this person spoke in language, we can make a contextual guess. So stick around. Now, let's start off with one that's a bit funny. Jackie Chan. He grew up in Hong Kong from parents who had fled the Civil War. So his first tongue was probably Mandarin, but he was surrounded by Cantonese. So he had both quite early on, which is very common in that part of China. Clearly he speaks English, as you know, and then a bit of a trick of his sleeve, he speaks ASL, American Sign Language. I don't know. I mean, to be able to do that with your hands, that's a serious skill, and I applaud the fellow. He's one of my favorites, Jackie Chan. He has additional skill with these languages: German, Japanese, Korean, and Thai. Oh, and Spanish. Did I mention Spanish? He's unusual in the acting world because he has equal weight in his appeal around the Pacific Rim. And I think that's not entirely why he's successful, but having these all in a combination would give you an ability to communicate with fans that's without parallel in many actors today. So let's move on to these historical figures that I mentioned. That was just a taste of something a bit funny. James Madison. James Madison, 4th President of the United States and one of the founders of the American Republic. He spoke 6 languages: French, Ancient Greek, Italian, Latin, and Hebrew, in addition to English. These languages are important because these were all being used out of the ideas of the Scottish Enlightenment. Hebrew, key because it is the language that produced these ideas of equality before God. Latin and Greek, the ideas of the Republic. French and Italian, the ideas of the Renaissance and encroaching into the Enlightenment. Without these languages, the American Constitution and the Bill of Rights would not have been possible. And James Madison is often credited as being the father of the American Constitution. James Madison was the founding father who played the most pivotal role in promoting and drafting the Constitution itself of the American Republic. And I think that's possible only because of the languages that he spoke, which fed those kinds of specific ideas when merged together into this document. So that's an incredible legacy. Cleopatra, Pharaoh of Egypt, famous, and she spoke at least 9 languages. Surprisingly, her first language was not Egyptian, but Koine Greek. This was a lingua franca across the Eastern Mediterranean. She was the first Ptolemaic ruler. Ptolemaic? I don't know how to say that properly, but the Greeks ruled Egypt for a few centuries, right? And before her, there were no Greek rulers of Egypt who spoke Egypt. She was the first to. Remarkable woman. But then she also spoke the languages of those around her, the kingdoms around her. Meroitic, the language further south in the kingdom of Kush, further down the Nile, and also cave dwellers in Libya. But to the east, she knew Hebrew and possibly Aramaic, but Hebrew and Aramaic are very similar. She spoke Syriac, the lingua franca of the Fertile Crescent, northern Iraq, Syria. She spoke Median and Parthian, languages in western Iran. She also spoke Old Arabic, the language of the tribes of the deserts beyond civilization, and Latin. She had more than one Roman lover. The fact that she did this and was a woman in that era is astounding. She was clearly a woman who used diplomacy instead of war when it suited her. And in fact, what led to her downfall was using war instead of diplomacy, which had been so successful before, through her Roman lovers. Friedrich Engels, co-founder of the Marxist religion. And yes, it is a religion. A few of you have asked me to do a video about why Marxism is a religion, and I hope to do that at some point, but I need to do more reading. But as for this video, he spoke the following languages, and probably a few more: German, Russian, Italian, Irish, Portuguese, Spanish, Polish, French, English, Lombard, Dutch, and able to read a few others, including some extinct languages. This guy had a few languages under his belt, didn't he? And what makes this so important is that because he was at the beginning of this Marxist religion, he was able to converse with others who followed this socialist faith in other countries and communicate with them about spreading this religion. Because he was able to speak Russian, he influenced Vladimir Lenin deeply, which has changed our world forever. Napoleon. Now this one's quite well known, and you may have known that his first language was not French. It was Corsican. He also spoke Italian as well as French. But in addition to that, he did speak German to a high degree, and he was getting by in English. So 5 languages. And his Italian language enabled his Italian campaigns in his early career to be much more successful than they would have been otherwise, allowing his ascendancy to become emperor. He's not as much as a polyglot as Cleopatra or probably anyone else on this list was, but the fact that he had exposure to these languages and was in a world in which his specific mixture of Corsican and Italian and then French played into this. It shaped his identity, and through him gaining power has shaped us and our conceptions of the world today. Christopher Columbus. We know he knew Latin, Castilian Spanish, Portuguese, and lingua franca, which was a pidgin language spoken across the Mediterranean, involving Catalan, different dialects of Italian, Spanish, even bits of Arabic, bits of Greek, squished together so that people could understand each other. And this meant Christopher Columbus, he may have not even thought of these languages that he spoke. His native language would have been Ligurian or Genoan, up in the northern bit of Italy, a sailing city. He may have not even seen these as being different languages. He spoke Greek as well. He may have spoken Hebrew, we don't know. We now know that Christopher Columbus was, at least by descent, a Jew, and Jews of the era certainly got around the Mediterranean and were in all of the places that he was. But the fact that he spoke these languages meant he was able to assemble a group of men together from different viewpoints that could have given him the knowledge to think that yonder, that way to China, not east, was even possible. So speaking all those languages must have given him a sense of curiosity. Enoch Powell. a British politician of the mid-20th century who was labelled a bigot, a racist, a xenophobe by his own Conservative Party for a speech in which since has been labelled rivers of blood speech, even though he never actually used those words in the speech. It was just a speech saying that if we don't get mass migration under control, we will have a divided society in which enclaves within all our cities are foreign in culture, and which social cohesion and unity of British society begins breaking down as mobs take to the streets, which has come true. That's what we're seeing today. That's truth. That's not racist. And so I chose this guy because he was called a racist, a bigot, and a xenophobe. But if you look at the languages he spoke, that's not... well, they suggest that's not true. English, German, French, Italian, modern Greek, ancient Greek, Urdu, as well as enough to get by in Spanish, Welsh. I've seen clips of him speaking Welsh rather well, actually. Portuguese and Russian, Hebrew and Aramaic. If he was a far-right bigot xenophobe, I really doubt he would have spoken both Hebrew and Urdu. So let's clear that up. But the fact that he did this as well, he was also an ancient languages scholar, so that's where a lot of the Aramaic and Latin and Greek comes in. But he spoke modern Greek. So this guy's appreciating the transmission of a culture over the centuries, and he understands how it changes and what can be lost. And I think the key thing here in these languages that he speaks is that he spoke both ancient and modern Greek. And he understood what Britain could lose if we just let the gates open and the flood come in unimpeded for decades and decades, as we have done. Marco Polo, who, whilst Wales was fighting two different wars against Edward I in its unsuccessful bid for independence, Marco Polo traveled along the Silk Road from Italy all the way to China and back from 1271 to 1295. That's a long time. That's over 20 years. So what languages did he speak? His first language was Venetian. He spoke Venetian Italian, which is a very strong dialect, maybe a language in its own right, according to some. I'm not an expert, but he spoke that as his mother tongue. But then he traveled as well. He spoke French, which was on the rise as a courtly language, specifically in that period of the 13th century. He spoke Persian, common to foreigners, by the way, in the Yuan dynasty of China. This was a language which controlled much of the Silk Road, controlling trade from the east to the Mediterranean in the west. Turkish, he had to get through their lands to get to China. Now, one thing that's interesting is, what language did Marco Polo not speak? He did not speak Chinese, despite living there for 17 years. And you're like, how is that even possible unless you have muffs on your ears? Because Mongolian, under the Khans, was the language of the aristocracy and elite. They had conquered China. So he acquired Mongolian, not Chinese. Venetian, French, Persian, Turkish, and Mongolian. That's quite a mixture, and I would have been fascinated to speak to such a man. Next one. Her Majesty Elizabeth I. Now, she is the monarch, the only ruler of England who has ever spoken basically the languages of their own subjects. So in Elizabeth I, we have several things going on. This is the Renaissance, so she's got the classic languages of Latin and Greek, but also the languages of prestige of that era, French and Italian. But she goes a step further. She learns the languages of the subjects that her predecessors had conquered through marriage or war and various methods in Wales, Scotland, and Ireland, to understand the culture of those she ruled over. Oh, I find it interesting that she spoke Spanish. because Spain was her enemy. So she's studying how to kill her enemies. Women really are more diplomatic in some ways, aren't they? I said I would give you a bonus, and here we are. Vlad Tepes, Dracula. He was a Romanian. And we don't know what languages he spoke, but this fellow has made an excellent video in Romanian with English subtitles, which I'll put down below for you, explaining what I'm about to tell you in much better detail, but do stay tuned. This guy was taken by Ottoman Turks and held hostage there, where he refused to convert to Islam, being beaten and tortured basically over and over again. Throughout this time, he refused to convert to Islam. But he learned Turkish, which enabled him to understand his enemy in a deep, deep way, which he would later use to terrify them. But he was of a very unique time, and he was more in Transylvania than Wallachia, which he did rule Wallachia, but in 3 different points, and it was brief. He spent almost 30 years of his life north of the mountains in Transylvania and Hungary, and married Hungarian women. So whilst it is very likely that he spoke Romanian, it is also incredibly doubtful that he did not speak Hungarian or even prefer it if he's marrying 2 Hungarian women. What kind of woman a man goes for says a lot about him, doesn't it? So we can safely assume that he spoke Turkish, Romanian, and Hungarian, but it does not stop there. We know that he lived in German, Saxon-speaking areas in Transylvania during his lifetime. He probably spoke German. We don't know. He may have had a bit of Latin, more so than Slavic, which was Church Slavonic. The standard education for young boys at that time also included Greek, so it's probable that he spoke Greek as well. So, Hungarian, Romanian, we don't know which one of those 2 would have been his preferred or first language. We don't know. Turkish, yeah, German, and Greek, with a bit of Latin probably, and exposure to Slavic, but I don't think he'd be able to speak it. Which languages you speak determines the path of how you view the world, and by how you view the world, how you interact with the world, and the judgments and political alliances that you make. Hey, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, leave a super like if you want to be super. And thank you very much for watching. Join me on Patreon, buy me a coffee, and watch this video here.